Hello and welcome back to Sharks Happen. On today's episode, we're going to have our spear fisherman attacks, we're going to have an attack on a swimmer, and we're going to have a rare double attack, two people bitten by the same shark. It's going to be a great show. We're going to end this out. We're going to have another one of those workplace incidents, so stick around. It's going to be a great show. Okay, we'll start off the show over at McMaster's Beach, and that is over in Australia. The date, March 14th of 2000. Craig Ruth, he's 40 years old, and he is out doing some evening surfing. It's 6:30 at night, and it kind of got dark at 6, so he's out there at night, and he's laying on his board 110 to 120 yards from shore, but no telling the depth of the water when suddenly he thought that his board had hit a rock. It just kind of hit something or lifted up a little bit and he tumbled into the water. Next thing he knows, now he knows that a shark, it involves a shark because he's being towed at night out to the sea. He says it was like an episode of Jaws. It sounds like it was taking him under and back to the surface as it was taking him out. Finally, the shark let go of the board when he was about 120 yards out, so it was probably swimming straight across from the beach, but he said he made that 100-yard swim in about 10 minutes. So he said he swam as fast as he's ever swam. Didn't even bother getting back on the board. He just let it tow behind him as he made the swim in. Yeah, I don't know if I'd be going back out towards the board if it's out towards where the shark was either. So that's our attack on Craig Ruth, standard attack on the board. Then we're going to head over to Wallis Island. That's Wallis and Futuna, French-owned Polynesian island. The date is May 23rd of 2014. Eric Barnabas, he is out doing some scuba diving while his friend is spearfishing. So Eric is on, he's got scuba gear on, he's got the tanks, and his buddy is spearfishing, and Eric is taking photos or filming him, one of the two. He's documenting his spearfishing. They see a huge school of red snappers, and that brings a shark that decides to charge right at Barnabas. And Barnabas says all he had time to do was to turn and kind of curl up his legs and put his arms up, and that shark hit him in the upper thigh and in the hip, and it's hanging on to him. And this is a 10-foot gray shark, so who knows what kind of shark it is, but it's gray. It's not like a gray and a white where you know it's a tiger or a white. This is some kind of reef shark. Maybe a whaler type thing, but it's on his hip, and he says he hit it on its neck to get it to let go. It lets go and it goes in. He ends up going in and he gets repaired on this one, gets sewn up. Doesn't sound like there was any tendons or anything that was ripped up in the process, so we'll put this down as an attack and not an attempt to predate by a 10 to 11 foot shark, gray shark. We just don't know what type. Now we head over to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and the date is January 25th of 2009. John Emory, he is out doing some spearfishing with a buddy. He is a contractor for the base at Guantanamo Bay, it sounds like, and he is out doing some spearfishing. It's 10:30 in the morning, and he's got himself 150 yards from shore, and he's only in 3 feet deep water. He says suddenly he feels a surge of water behind him. At first he's thinking, it's just like wave or a quick, strong current. And then he's hit, like he said, it felt like a hammer on his leg. Shark grabs him on his calf and has a hold of him. And he takes and punches the shark and says how it felt like sandpaper when he hit the shark. The shark lets him go, and he makes his way over to some nearby rocks. He's still 150 yards from shore, but now he's on some rocks. He climbed up on some rocks and made himself a tourniquet. But the shark is staying in the area. The shark won't leave him alone. And he's up there for about a half hour when his buddy finally comes over. So the shark's still in the area, and his buddy swims over and gets him to get in the water. They go in, get him fixed up. They said that he lost one of his arteries in the situation, which I didn't know you could lose an artery, but it seems he lost an artery in his calf. They reattached first of all, they fixed his muscle, then they reattached the muscle to the leg, and then they sewed up the wound itself. This must have been a crazy operation, but the wound, if you look at my leg, it's from right below, they said it's about 7 inches. So sounds like a little bull shark. The fact it wouldn't go away and you know, took and bit into him, got some blood in the water and wouldn't leave. I'm thinking this is probably a little bull shark that got a hold of him, maybe a 6-7 footer or something like that. 7 inches, that'd be a decent sized shark, I do believe. So we're going to put this down as an attack, not an attempt to predate. We just don't know what kind of shark that was or exactly what size. He estimated at 6.5 feet. Okay, now we're going to head over to New Smyrna Beach, and that is in Florida. The date, August 29th of 2016. Sam Cumisky, he is 25 years old, and he and friends are out doing some surfing. They normally surf on the New Smyrna side of a jetty, but on the other side of the jetty is the Ponce Inlet, and they go over to that side of the jetty as the waves are better for their surfing. So they're over on the other side of the jetty. It's 3 o'clock. He is in 5 feet deep water, but it doesn't say how far from shore he is. And he had just come off riding a wave and come off his board when he said it felt like he kicked a wall with his right foot. And he said he knew what had happened right away because the shark bit down on his right foot and shook pretty violently, and then released him, and he was able to get himself in. He ended up with 4 tendons that were cut, severed on his foot, and he had a bad gash on the sole side of his foot to his sole of his foot. So he ends up going in. They have to do some surgery to repair the damage done by this shark. He said this was a 6.5 foot bull shark that got a hold of him. So we're going to put this down as an attack, not an attempt to predate by a 6.5 foot bull shark. You know, we're going to head out to North Avalon Beach, and that is in Australia, and the date is March 1st of 2009. Andrew Lindop, he is 15 years old, and he and his father Charles are the only two in the water surfing at 6:45 in the morning, and he's just under 200 yards from shore. He's somewhere around 150 to 200 yards from shore. And his father Charles had just taken a wave in when he heard his son scream, and he turned to look and saw him struggling in the water. So he paddled back out to his son. They caught a wave where he was able to bring him in. He gets him into shore, and the father was telling people, you know, hold this, do that. I guess his leg was torn up pretty bad, and he was going into shock. So the father was calming him down, talking to him, and he ends up going in and surviving the attack. They have to go ahead and sew him up pretty good. They didn't get the son couldn't identify the species or the size, but they believe this is a 6.5 foot shark that got a hold of his leg and mangled up his lower leg pretty good. So we're going to put this down as an attack, not an attempt to predate by a 6.5 foot shark. We're just not sure what type. Okay, now we're going to head over to Makawa Beach, which is in Oahu, Hawaii, and the date is June 24th of 2003. John Marrack, he is 60 years old. He and his wife Stephanie and a group of others are out in the water. They are swimming. They're swimming with a pod of spinner dolphins. About 30 to 40 spinner dolphins are in the water with them, and they're in the water. They're 150 yards from shore, and they're in 30 to 60 foot deep water, which is crystal clear on this day. And it's about 8 o'clock in the morning. Now, suddenly the dolphins scatter, and John feels a tug on his foot. First he feels a pain, a gripping pain, and then it tugs him down a little bit and releases. And when he looks down, he says he could see a big gray animal down there, a big gray shark down there swimming around in circles. And so he starts swimming to shore with his wife. They start swimming in. He says his concern was keeping himself between the shark and his wife, and they go swimming in, and he realized the extent of his wounds. When he was swimming, he saw a flap of skin floating along the surface. So he goes in. He ended up with a fractured ankle, and it tore up his foot pretty good, slicing it open, and it just sounds like a grisly wound. They go ahead and fix it up. We're going to put this down as an attack and not a predation. John identified it as a 10 to 12 foot shark, but they don't know exactly the species. But one of the fishery managers over there said that there were white sharks that were feeding on spinner dolphins all along that coast. So I would put this down as a 10 to 12 foot great white shark, but we don't know for sure. So 10 to 12 foot shark. Okay, now we're going to finish up our unprovoked attacks over at Makemo Atoll, and that is French Polynesia. The date, April 18th, 2016. Teva Tokoregi, he is 26 years old. He and his cousin Hotua, they are out doing some spear fishing. The pair are in the water. They've speared a fish, and a shark, a gray reef shark of about 6.5 feet, shows up and wants their fish. Now, one of the two takes and they stab the shark in one of the fins to get it to scare off, and it seems to have sent it into somewhat of a frenzy situation. Where they both were trying to retrieve their guns to be able to defend themselves, and when they were doing this, the shark turned and charged at Teva, and it bit him in the wrist. And it sounds like it bit him in the leg at some point, and the calf, but it bit him in the arm, and Teva's got a hold of the boat. So he almost made it to the boat, and the shark's got him by the arm. He's holding onto the boat, and the shark's got him by the arm, and Ayatoa, his cousin, is hitting the shark on the head. Finally, the shark releases him, and he's able to get himself up on the boat. Now, Hotua is getting himself up into the boat, and just before he's able to pull himself into the boat, the shark grabs him by the knee and pulls him back into the water. He says that then he just took and kind of pushed down on the shark's head and was able to climb up and into the boat. They take him in. There was severe lacerations to Teva's arm. There was lacerations to his hand, his right arm and forearm and hand, and he also had his right calf was lacerated, and they had to fix him up. No word on the damage done to the knee on the cousin Hotua Ayatua though, and might not have bit him hard enough just to pull him back down in the water, it sounds like. So maybe he didn't need much work done to him, but there's no mention of that in the stories. That's an attack, not an attempt to predate. It was after the fish, and then they sent it in. This is a provoked attack. They went ahead and stabbed it. I know that, you know, you shouldn't do that, but it wasn't after them, it was after the fish, and that was kind of obvious that it didn't bite them until after they stabbed it. So this provoked. We're going to put it in the stats, but we're going to mention that it's provoked in there. Okay, now we're going to finish out the show with, you don't hear that every day. It's definitely a bad day at work. Before we get to that, I just want to say that the Etsy store is open. You can go to sharkshappen2too.etsy.com, and you can order up whatever you want. We're going to get into this real quick. In September of 1970, David Cook worked at Manly Marineland, which is now Ocean World over in Australia, New South Wales, Australia. And he was a diver, and he was feeding fish. It was about 3:15 in the afternoon, and he was feeding the sharks, and he ran out of fish, so he was swimming back to go get more fish to feed the sharks. And apparently one of the sharks didn't want to wait and came up and nipped him in the leg. He ended up with puncture wounds that they had to sew up and probably just give him antibiotics for, as this was a 6.5 foot sand tiger shark, so you get those round holes. So, you know, some of them probably just need to be cleaned out and given antibiotics, where others that might be a little bit deeper or caused a tear, they probably have to sew those up. So some people have been bitten and they haven't had to have any surgery done by those sharks. As long as they're just biting and releasing, then they're not going to have much but just little holes going in, maybe, you know, it looks like 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch. Not going to kill you. So that's our story of the Ocean World, back then, Manly Marineland attack on David Cook, 20 years old. So that would be just a workplace accident, I guess you would call it. And that's our show for today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you join me in another 3 or 4 days for another show full of attacks. But until then, if you go into that water, you are much more afraid of those sharks than they are of you.